Have you ever walked into a place you helped build, only to be told you didn't belong there? Imagine saving for years, building a dream, even owning part of it, and then, in front of strangers, being humiliated not because of what you paid, but because of who you are. That's what happened to Angela Coleman, a black CEO, and her 10-year-old son Joshua on his birthday. A hotel that carried her investment, her vision, became the very place that erased her dignity. In just 9 minutes, she faced a choice: swallow the pain quietly, or stand up not just for herself, but for every guest who had ever been told they didn't belong. What would you do if it were you, if your child looked up at you with tears in their eyes, asking, "Do we really not belong here?" This is not just a story about a hotel. It's a story about courage, about justice, and about rewriting the rules of respect. Stay with us as we uncover how humiliation turned into history. And before we begin, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that touch the heart and spark change. The lobby of the Sterling Grand Hotel gleamed under warm golden lights. Marble floors stretched in polished patterns, and the scent of fresh lilies floated from a vase taller than a child near the center of the room. Business travelers rolled their suitcases toward the elevators. Couples lounged in plush armchairs, sipping cocktails from cut glass tumblers. It was Friday evening in downtown Chicago, and the hotel was alive with the quiet hum of luxury. Angela Coleman stepped through the revolving glass doors, her 10-year-old son Joshua's hand in hers. She wore a simple navy blazer, jeans, and flats. No designer logos, no jewelry except a plain silver band. Joshua bounced beside her in sneakers and a Spider-Man t-shirt, chattering about the pool he had read about on the hotel's website. "Do you think it has the big slide?" "Mom," he asked, his eyes wide with the kind of excitement only children carried without hesitation. Angela smiled. "We'll find out soon enough. It's your birthday weekend. That pool is waiting for you." Joshua grinned and tugged her hand forward toward the check-in desk. The Sterling Grand was one of the flagship properties of Sterling Hospitality Group. Angela knew it well, not as a guest, but as one of its owners. She held a 25% stake in the entire company, making her the third-largest shareholder. But tonight, she wasn't arriving as an executive. She was here as a mother, ready to celebrate her son's birthday with a suite she had personally reserved earlier that week. Behind the sleek granite counter stood a woman in a sharp blazer with a name tag that read Linda Watkins. Her smile was practiced, polished, the kind that fit perfectly in promotional brochures. Yet as Angela and Joshua approached, that smile thinned into something colder. Linda leaned across the counter slightly, her voice low at first, then sharper, loud enough for others nearby to hear. "This hotel isn't for your kind," she said flatly. The words cut through the air. Angela's hand tightened around Joshua's. She felt his little fingers squeeze back, unsure, frightened. Joshua looked up at her, confusion shadowing his bright eyes. "Mom," he whispered, "why are they being mean?" The lobby's hum seemed to hush. A businessman glanced up from his laptop. A couple paused mid-conversation. Angela's voice, calm but firm, broke the silence. "Excuse me." Linda straightened, her expression untouched by shame. "I said, you may want to try a motel on the south side, or perhaps sleep in your car. The Sterling Grand isn't the right fit for you." Angela's brow arched ever so slightly. She reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and with a steady hand opened the confirmation email. "I already booked a premium VIP suite," she said evenly, placing the phone on the counter so Linda could see the reservation code. Linda barely glanced at it. "Then the system is wrong. You'll need to make other arrangements." From the side, another clerk. Rachel Owens snickered under her breath, but loud enough to sting. Try a slum motel. This isn't for them. Joshua's small hand gripped tighter, his voice thinner now. Are we in trouble? Angela crouched slightly, brushing her hand across his curls. No, sweetheart, she murmured, her voice calm, though her chest burned. We are not in trouble. But she could feel the stares of strangers pressing against her back, the weight of their silence, the choice they faced to watch quietly or to step forward. Then it happened quickly. A tall, silver-haired man in a tailored gray suit approached the counter. He didn't look at Angela. He didn't look at Joshua. He looked only at Linda and Rachel. His name, she would soon learn, was Edward Blake, a longtime guest of the hotel. He slid a folded bill $200 across the counter. Get them out, he muttered, his voice oozing with entitlement. They don't belong here. Linda's hand moved fast, tucking the money into a drawer as though it had always belonged there. She turned back to Angela, her voice carrying a new authority. I'm asking you to leave. Ma'am. Now. Angela stood upright, her phone still resting on the counter. Her pulse quickened, but her voice did not rise. I have a reservation. My son and I are staying here. Rachel scoffed. Not anymore. You've been flagged. Joshua pressed closer against his mother's side, whispering again. Mom, can we just go? Angela looked down at him, then back at the two clerks. For a fleeting second, she felt the temptation to turn around, to protect Joshua from humiliation, to walk away. But then she remembered every boardroom where someone had once told her she didn't belong. She remembered the laughter, the dismissive looks, the questions about whether she was qualified. She had turned all of that into an empire. She would not walk away now, not when her son was watching. No, she said softly to Joshua. We don't run from wrong. We stand in front of it. Across the lobby, a murmur spread. Phones shifted in hands. Guests whispered, and somewhere in the corner, a young man lifted his phone, quietly pressing record. His name was Daniel Wu, and in less than an hour, his video would travel farther than anyone in that room could imagine. But for now, it was just a mother, a son, and a front desk that believed money looked only one way, and Angela Coleman was about to show them otherwise. The silence in the lobby fractured as Linda Watkins gestured sharply to the side. Security, she called, her voice shrill yet confident, as though certain the hotel itself bent to her will. A man in a navy blazer with a badge clipped to his chest stepped forward. Carl Jennings, hotel security, his jaw tight, his eyes flicking from Angela to Joshua with unease. He had seen incidents before rowdy guests, drunken arguments, but this was different. Ma'am, Carl began cautiously, the front desk says you don't have a valid reservation. I'll need you and your son to step outside. Angela turned her head slowly toward him, meeting his eyes. And what did you verify? Mr. Jennings, did you check the system? Did you look at the confirmation number I provided? Carl shifted. I was told you're not in the system. By them, Angela said, her voice even calm, but edged like steel. She pointed subtly toward Linda and Rachel. Not by the truth. Joshua tugged at her sleeve, whispering, Mom, maybe we can just go somewhere else. It's okay. His voice carried a tremble, a child's instinct to retreat from conflict. Angela knelt down, her eyes level with his. Joshua, this is your birthday. We came here because this hotel promised to make it special. We don't leave just because someone decides we don't belong. Do you understand? Joshua nodded hesitantly, but his eyes glistened. Before Angela could stand again, a polished laugh cut through the tension. Edward Blake, the wealthy guest, had not strayed far. He leaned against the counter, his hand resting casually on a gold-tipped cane. "You're wasting your breath," he said. "People like you should know when to step aside. This establishment has standards." Angela rose to her full height. "Standards," she repeated quietly. Blake smirked. "Yes, and you don't meet them." A sharp intake of breath rippled through nearby guests. The cruelty of the words was naked, unpolished, no longer hidden beneath corporate smiles. Rachel Owens added fuel. "We've had issues before. Certain types of guests think they can just walk in because they book online. But this is a premium property. We protect the integrity of the brand." Angela's lips curved in the faintest trace of a smile, one that wasn't joy, but restraint. "Integrity?" she asked. "Is that what you call it?" Carl Jennings glanced between the parties, uncertainty tugging at his face. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but Linda cut in. "Mr. Jennings," she snapped, "please escort them out, now, before this gets messy." But it was already messy. The room's atmosphere had shifted. Conversations halted, eyes locked onto the scene. Guests who had ignored the first cutting remark now watched intently, some whispering, some frowning. A young woman near the bar raised her phone, hitting record. Another followed. Then Joshua, in the kind of innocence only children carried, spoke up. His voice rang clearer than he realized. "But it's my birthday," he said, clutching his mother's hand. "You promised balloons and cake." The words pierced the air with a kind of unbearable tenderness. The cruelty of the situation sharpened in contrast to the child's plea. Even Carl's stern posture faltered. His eyes softened, if only for a moment. Linda, however, remained unmoved. "Birthdays don't entitle you to break into hotels you don't belong in," she said coldly. Angela inhaled slowly, exhaled just as slowly. Her mind raced not with panic, but with calculation. She remembered board meetings where investors underestimated her, where competitors called her lucky instead of brilliant. She remembered nights she stayed awake, mapping strategies no one believed would work, until they did. Every slight, every barrier had built the fortress of calm she stood inside now. She looked at Carl again. "Mr. Jennings, I ask you one thing. Look at the reservation in your system. Not what they tell you, not what money whispers in your ear, just the facts." Carl hesitated. "I don't have access right now. The system's down." "Convenient," Angela murmured. From behind, a firm voice spoke. "She's telling the truth." Heads turned. A middle-aged woman with salt and pepper hair, wearing a green scarf and carrying a leather tote, stepped forward. Margaret Hill, a long-time guest known by many staff members. "I was just at the counter earlier today. I overheard Linda canceling a booking, laughing about how she'd free up the suite for someone who deserved it." The lobby froze. Angela's gaze sharpened. Linda's face paled, then flushed crimson. "That's ridiculous," she snapped. "This woman must have misheard." Margaret shook her head. "I know what I heard, and I'm not the only one." She looked around, and indeed, murmurs rose, others nodding, others shifting uncomfortably. Linda's composure cracked. "Enough. Mr. Jennings, do your job." But now Carl's hands hovered near his radio, uncertain. His posture no longer leaned toward action, but toward hesitation. Angela took a step closer to the counter, her voice calm, but carrying. "Are you sure you want to stand by this? Linda, are you sure this is the choice you want recorded, not just on these cameras, not just in front of these witnesses, but in front of history, for the first time?" Linda's eyes flickered toward the guests holding up phones. Dozens now, a quiet army of lenses capturing her every word. Still, she forced a brittle smile. "Yes, Because people like you never last here. Angela held her son's hand, steadying him. We'll see, she said softly. And in that moment, the scales of the room tipped. This was no longer a private humiliation, it was a public reckoning. The tension in the Sterling Grand's lobby grew heavier, as though the air itself carried the weight of injustice. Angela stood rooted at the counter. Joshua pressed against her side. The crowd had shifted from curious bystanders to quiet observers, their gazes flicking between the staff and the mother, who refused to leave. From near the lounge, a man in his early 30s lifted his phone higher, no longer subtle. His face was calm, deliberate. Daniel Wu, a tech entrepreneur in town for a conference, had already been recording for several minutes. His lens captured not only the words but the expressions, the smugness on Linda's face, the smirk from Rachel, the indifference in Edward Blake's eyes. He caught Angela's eye and gave the smallest of nods. A promise without words, I see you. I'm recording. Angela returned the nod almost imperceptibly. A quiet strength passed between them, the knowledge that silence would no longer bury this moment. Nearby, Margaret Hill, the guest who had already spoken up, moved closer. I've stayed here for years, she said firmly, her voice carrying. I've never seen anything like this. The way you're treating this woman and her child, it's disgraceful. Rachel rolled her eyes. Please, ma'am, don't insert yourself into situations you don't understand. Margaret's chin lifted. I understand enough. I raised 3 children. I know what it means when a boy has to ask his mother why adults are being cruel to him. Her eyes softened as they landed on Joshua. And no child should have to ask that question on his birthday. Joshua blinked, his lip trembling, but he straightened just a little, encouraged by the stranger's kindness. And then another voice, hesitant at first, spoke from behind the counter. Sophia Patel, a young intern in a too large blazer, looked down at the papers in her hands. She had been pretending to be busy, her stomach twisted in knots since the scene began. She knew what Linda had done. She had seen the sweet cancellation earlier that afternoon. She had heard Rachel whisper, Edward Blake will be pleased. But fear weighed heavy. She needed this internship. Her parents had sacrificed for her education. Speaking up could end it all. Still, when her eyes met Angela's steady, calm, yet filled with a mother's quiet fire, Sophia felt something shift inside. Her voice shook. She's right, Sophia said. Rachel spun toward her. What did you say? Sophia swallowed hard. I saw the cancellation. I saw Linda override the booking in the system after Edward Blake handed her money. The room gasped. The whispering grew louder, phones tilting closer to capture every word. Linda's face turned scarlet. That's a lie, she snapped. This girl is a temporary intern. She doesn't know what she's talking about. But Sophia's voice grew steadier now, as if truth itself lent her courage. I know exactly what I saw, and I heard you laugh about it. You said she'll never know what happened. Daniel's phone camera panned smoothly to Sophia, capturing her trembling but resolute stance. Angela turned to the young woman. Thank you, she said softly. 2 simple words, but they carried weight. Words of acknowledgement, of gratitude, of solidarity. Edward Blake scoffed loudly, trying to drown out the testimony. This is ridiculous. You're all making a scene over nothing. Some of us have real business to attend to. But his voice no longer held the same dominance. The crowd was no longer indifferent. People muttered words like shameful and unbelievable. Someone near the elevators called out, "Let her stay." Another echoed, "Check the system." She has a reservation. Carl Jennings, the security guard, shifted his weight again, visibly unsettled. His radio crackled faintly, a voice asking for a status update. He didn't respond. For the first time, his loyalty to the front desk wavered in the face of public scrutiny. Joshua looked up at his mother again, his voice small but stronger than before. "Mom, they believe you." Angela knelt beside him, brushing away a stray tear on his cheek. "Some of them do," she said gently. "And sometimes that's enough to change everything." She stood again, squaring her shoulders, turning back to Linda. Her voice did not rise, but it carried across the lobby like the steady toll of a bell. "You've taken money to strip a child of his celebration," Angela said. "You've lied to your own security team. And now, in front of your colleagues and your guests, the truth is here. Are you sure this is the legacy you want to build in your uniform?" Linda's lips tightened. Rachel looked away. Blake grumbled under his breath. And in the corner, Daniel Wu's camera kept rolling, the red light steady, the quiet witness to history. The lobby of the Sterling Grand had transformed from a place of luxury into a stage of reckoning. Every glance, every murmur, every raised phone camera added to the tension pressing against the marble walls. Angela stood firm. Joshua's hand still clung to hers, but his grip had loosened slightly. The boy could sense something shifting, as if the tide had begun to turn. Sophia Patel's trembling testimony still hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. The crowd absorbed it, processed it, and quietly aligned. There was no going back. Linda Watkins' voice sliced through the silence, shrill and desperate. "This is nonsense. She's lying. Just an intern. Her words mean nothing here." Angela tilted her head, her calm expression almost curious. "If her words mean nothing, then why do you sound afraid?" "Linda!" The lobby reacted with a ripple of whispers. Linda's face flushed. Rachel Owens shot her a worried glance but quickly masked it. Edward Blake, still leaning on his gold-tipped cane, laughed mockingly. "Afraid? Please. You're a guest making a scene. That's all. A loud, disruptive guest." Angela's lips curved into a restrained smile. "A guest, you say?" She pulled her phone back from the counter, tapped once, and held it up. The screen displayed her reservation again. She turned the screen outward for everyone to see. Premium Skyline Suite. Paid in advance. Confirmation number 2478KR. Gasps echoed as a few guests leaned forward. Even Carl Jennings, the security guard, squinted at the screen, his uncertainty deepening. But Angela wasn't done. She lowered the phone, her eyes sweeping the room, her voice steady, yet carrying the kind of weight only truth can lend. "I'm not just a guest here. I'm not a stranger who wandered into this lobby. My name is Angela Coleman." Linda crossed her arms, scoffing. And what exactly is that supposed to mean? Angela's voice did not falter. "It means I own 25% of Sterling Hospitality Group. This hotel, these walls, this marble, the very uniforms you wear exist in part because of me." The room froze. Even the faint hum of the air conditioning seemed to hush. Rachel's mouth opened, then closed, as though her words had been stolen. Edward Blake blinked, confusion flickering across his smug face. And Linda's eyes widened before narrowing again, her bravado crumbling under the weight of realization. Angela continued, her voice calm, but with an edge sharp enough to cut through steel. "So when you tell me I don't belong in my own hotel, when you humiliate my child in front of strangers, you're not just insulting us, you're insulting this company's very foundation." The crowd erupted in murmurs, some shocked, some outraged, others muttering, "She owns the hotel." Joshua looked up at his mother, eyes wide, a mix of awe and confusion. "Mom, you didn't tell them." Angela knelt briefly, brushing a hand across his cheek. "Sometimes, Joshua, it's not about telling people who you are. It's about showing them what they choose to ignore." The boy nodded slowly. understanding more than his years should allow. Edward Blake finally found his voice. This is absurd. Some sob story about ownership doesn't mean you can disrupt business. I've been coming here for years, and I deserve the best suite. Angela's gaze flicked toward him, unflinching. What you deserve is respect, just like anyone else. But respect isn't bought with bribes. Her eyes cut toward Linda. And it isn't enforced through lies. Daniel Wu's phone caught every second, the red recording light unwavering. He whispered quietly, as if to himself, but loud enough for those nearby to hear, "This is going viral." The shift was palpable. Guests who had been silent now spoke up. "She has every right to be here," one man called. "This is unbelievable," said a woman near the elevators. Another muttered angrily, kicking out the owner. "That's insane." Carl Jennings straightened his posture, his voice unsteady but audible. "Maybe we should verify this with management." "Yes," Angela said. "Let's." But Linda, red-faced and trembling, doubled down. "She's bluffing. Anyone can claim ownership. Don't listen to her. She's trying to manipulate you." Angela's calm never cracked. She tapped her phone again, pulling up an email. With one swipe, she opened an internal shareholder memo, Sterling Hospitality's official letterhead at the top. She enlarged her own name, Angela Coleman Shareholder, 25%. The crowd leaned in, phones catching screenshots. Margaret Hill's voice rang with satisfaction. "I told you she was telling the truth." Sophia Patel, still pale but stronger now, nodded firmly, "Yes, and I'll stand by what I said." She canceled that reservation for a bribe. Linda's composure shattered. Her voice cracked. No longer the sharp blade, but a desperate scramble. This isn't how things are done." Angela cut her off, her tone firm but never raised. "No, Linda, this is exactly how things are done when people forget dignity. When employees think their prejudice is stronger than policy. When a guest's wallet matters more than a child's birthday." She turned slightly, her voice sweeping the lobby. But not anymore. Joshua squeezed her hand tightly, his face filled with something new pride. Edward Blake sputtered, "You can't." This is but his voice was drowned by a rising chorus of guests, their discontent no longer contained. Linda looked around desperately for support, but found none. Even Rachel's eyes darted toward the floor, shame creeping in where arrogance once stood. And in that charged moment, Angela leaned forward just slightly, her words clear, her tone final. "Are you sure you want to stand by this decision? Because it will be remembered not just by me, not just by my son, but by every single person in this room, and by everyone who will see the truth beyond these walls." Daniel Wu lowered his phone briefly, whispering again. "It's already out there." The first twist had landed. The room, the staff, even Joshua all realized that Angela wasn't simply a guest fighting for her room. She was a woman of power, of dignity, and she had chosen this moment to reveal it. And it was only the beginning. The Sterling Grand Lobby had become a theater of truth. Every corner now buzzed with the low hum of whispers, the glow of smartphone screens, the weight of eyes fixed on one woman and her child. Angela Coleman stood motionless, her phone still glowing with proof of her ownership. Linda Watkins had fallen silent, her confidence cracked. Rachel Owens shifted from one foot to the other, eyes darting to the crowd. And Edward Blake muttered curses under his breath, his cane tapping nervously against the marble floor. But the silence between these figures was broken not by them, but by the faint chime of notifications. Daniel Wu glanced down at his phone and widened his eyes. He had been live-streaming on social media since the moment Linda uttered her cruel words. Comments were exploding in real time. Hearts and angry emojis floated across his screen. Thousands had tuned in within minutes. "It's already happening," Daniel whispered, half to himself. Margaret Hill leaned toward him. "What is people are watching?" he said. "Tens of thousands. They've seen everything." As if on cue, a young couple near the bar gasped. "It's trending," the woman said, showing her screen to her partner, Hugh Sterling. "Grand is trending." Angela noticed the shift. Heads were bent, screens lit, voices rose with urgency. What had started as a confrontation in one lobby was spreading beyond the marble walls into a living, breathing chorus of witnesses. Joshua tugged gently at her sleeve. His voice was small, trembling, carrying the weight of a boy's disappointment. "Mom, can we just go home? Please, I don't want this anymore." Angela's heart squeezed. For a brief moment, she wanted to scoop him up, leave the building, shield him from cruelty. But she knew walking away would mean he learned the wrong lesson. That dignity could be dismissed. That silence was safer than truth. She crouched down, pressing her forehead gently against his. "No, Joshua, we don't walk away from disrespect. We fix it. Do you understand?" His lower lip quivered. Tears welled up in his eyes. "But it's my birthday." His words cracked like fragile glass. The sound pierced through the lobby, sharper than any accusation. Even the coldest faces softened. A mother in a red coat near the elevator clutched her chest. Carl Jennings, the security guard, shifted uncomfortably, his hand dropping away from his radio. For a moment, humanity broke through the armor of procedure. Angela brushed away a tear rolling down Joshua's cheek. She spoke softly but firmly, knowing the crowd was listening. "Your birthday matters. You matter. And that's why we stand here, so that no one will ever tell you again that you don't belong where you've earned the right to be." Joshua sniffled, his eyes wide with trust. Angela rose again. This time, her voice carried. "Robert Kane," she said, addressing the lobby as though the very walls could hear her. "Where is the general manager of this hotel?" As if summoned. A tall man in a tailored suit hurried from the corridor. Robert Kane, the branch director, his face pale as he took in the crowd, the cameras, the atmosphere of crisis. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his tone strained. Linda rushed toward him like a drowning woman grabbing a rope. "Mr. Kane, thank God. This woman is disruptive. She doesn't have a reservation. She's causing chaos." Angela's voice sliced through. Calm and sharp. "Stop. He deserves the truth, not your lies." She turned toward Robert, meeting his eyes. "I am Angela Coleman, shareholder of Sterling Hospitality Group. I reserved the Skyline Suite under my name. Your staff canceled it for a bribe, humiliated me, and tried to throw out my son on his birthday." Gasps rippled again. Robert froze. His eyes widened as recognition dawned. He knew that name. He had read it in memos, seen it in shareholder reports. This was not just any guest. "Ms. Coleman," he stammered. I wasn't aware you would be here tonight. You weren't supposed to be," Angela replied, "but your staff made sure of that." Linda's face drained of color. Rachel stepped back as though distance might absolve her. Edward Blake shifted, suddenly less confident with the weight of truth pressing against him. Robert swallowed, his forehead damp. "This is a misunderstanding. I can fix this." Angela lifted her phone and pressed a button. The dial tone filled the lobby, broadcast through her speaker. A hush fell again. Every guest, every staff member, even Joshua, leaned closer. The call connected. A deep voice answered. "This is Charles Whitaker, chairman of Sterling Hospitality." "Angela, is everything all right?" The crowd erupted in murmurs. The chairman himself. Angela's voice was steady. "Charles, I'm standing in the lobby of Sterling Grand Chicago. I reserved the Skyline Suite for my son's birthday. Your staff canceled my reservation for a bribe, told me I don't belong here, humiliated us, and threatened to throw us out. Do you consider this acceptable for the brand we built?" The silence on the line was deafening. Then Whitaker's voice, tight with anger, but directed not at her, unacceptable. "Absolutely unacceptable. Put me on speaker." Angela raised the phone. The chairman's voice filled the lobby. "This is Charles Whitaker. To every employee listening, consider this a formal order. Ms. Coleman's reservation is reinstated immediately. Anyone involved in this misconduct will face termination before the day ends." Linda's knees nearly buckled. Rachel gasped. Carl Jennings lowered his eyes. Robert Kane's hands trembled as he tugged at his tie, and the crowd, once murmuring, now burst into open applause. Some clapped, others cheered, others shouted, "Yes." Joshua blinked through tears, surprised, then smiled timidly. Angela lowered the phone but did not end the call. "Thank you, Charles. But this is not just about one night. This is about a culture, and it will change." The chairman's voice was firm. "You have my full support. Do what you need to do." Angela ended the call. She turned to face the lobby, to face Linda, Rachel, Edward Blake, and Robert Kane. Her eyes were unwavering. "This is no longer about a room," she said. "This is about dignity, and I will not allow anyone to take that away from my son, from me, or from any guest who walks through these doors." Joshua squeezed her hand tightly. His tears had dried. Pride lit his young face. The first crescendo had been reached. The truth was no longer hidden, the power no longer doubted. And as Daniel Wu's live stream surged past 100,000 viewers, the world outside the Sterling Grand was already watching the reckoning unfold. The Sterling Grand lobby, moments after the chairman's voice boomed through Angela's phone, felt like it had shifted on its axis. Guests who had been silent now stood taller. Some clapped, others murmured their support. The air, once heavy with humiliation, carried a strange kind of energy justice beginning to take root. Linda Watkins pressed her lips tight, as though holding back words would somehow undo what had already spilled. Rachel Owens leaned against the counter, pale and rigid. Edward Blake had shrunk into the corner. His earlier arrogance dissolved into muttered excuses. Robert Kane, the branch director, tried to regain footing. He tugged at his cufflinks, attempting calm. "Ms. Coleman, please, let us take this conversation to a private office. The situation has escalated." "No," Angela interrupted, her voice steady. "The humiliation happened in public. The accountability will stay here, in public." Her words drew another round of murmurs. Some guests nodded vigorously, others pulled out their phones, capturing every word. Joshua, still holding her hand, looked up at her. "Are they going to stop now?" "Mom," Angela knelt down, brushing a curl from his forehead. "They will stop because we're not moving until the truth is out." At that moment, a voice broke through from the staff cluster. Softer than the rest, nervous but clear, it was Sophia Patel, the young intern who had watched everything unfold with wide eyes. I saw it," she said, her voice trembling. "I saw Linda take the money from that man." The lobby fell into silence. Every head turned toward Sophia. Her hands shook, but she didn't back down. And it wasn't just tonight. In training, they told us to look for guests who fit the brand. They said sometimes we'd have to cancel reservations if someone didn't match the image. Angela straightened slowly, her eyes narrowing. "They trained you to profile." Sophia nodded, swallowing hard. They never said it outright, but it was in the examples, the way they described premium clients. Designer luggage, suits, certain appearances. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Laura Bennett, the guest who had stood up earlier, folded her arms. So it's not one bad night. It's company policy. Robert Kane's face flushed red. That's not true. She's an intern. She doesn't understand. But Sophia's voice grew firmer. I do understand, and I kept the paperwork. She pulled a folded document from her tote bag, her fingers trembling as she held it out. Daniel Wu darted forward with his camera. Let her show it, he urged. Angela took the paper, unfolded it, and read silently. Her chest tightened with every line. The memo was blunt to maintain Sterling's visual brand alignment, prioritize upgrades and assistance for guests with clear income indicators. If uncertain, discretion must be used to protect Sterling's image. Angela lowered the paper. Her voice was calm but heavy, like a bell tolling in the quiet. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is systemic. Guests gasped. Someone muttered, "My God." Another whispered, "It was policy all along." Linda stammered, "That's not what it means." But Angela cut her off. "It means you erased a child's birthday reservation because his sneakers didn't match your fantasy of wealth. It means you thought my skin, my son's laughter, our presence were beneath your image. And now the world knows it." Joshua's voice rose unexpectedly, small but clear. "You said we didn't belong, but this is our hotel. Mom helped build it." The words struck harder than any memo. The boy's trembling honesty cracked through the lobby's tension. Edward Blake looked away, suddenly ashamed. Rachel bit her lip. Even Carl Jennings, the security guard, shifted uncomfortably. His posture slumped. Angela reached for Joshua's shoulder, steadying him, but let his words hang in the air. Daniel's phone buzzed wildly. "It's live," he whispered, eyes wide. "Over 2 million views already, and climbing." Robert Kane ran a hand over his face. "Ms. Coleman, please." This is being blown out of proportion. We're talking about an internal guideline, not discrimination. Angela held up the memo. When guidelines humiliate children and erase valid reservations, they stop being guidelines. They become chains. Joshua squeezed her hand tighter. His eyes glistened, but his voice steadied. "Mom, are they going to get away with it?" Angela leaned down, whispering just for him, though the crowd caught the echo. "Not tonight." Then she turned back to Robert. "This is bigger than one hotel, bigger than one night. This is about every guest who has ever been told quietly, or not so quietly, that they don't belong. And it ends now." The crowd erupted in murmurs again. Some applauded softly. A man near the back shouted, "That's right." Angela handed the memo back to Sophia, her expression firm. "Thank you for your courage. You will not be punished for telling the truth. Not while I'm here." Sophia's eyes filled with tears. She nodded, whispering, "Thank you." Angela turned once more to Robert. "I want every staff member involved, Linda Watkins, Rachel Owens, Robert Kane, and yes, even Carl Jennings terminated immediately. Not tomorrow, not after review, tonight." Robert sputtered. "You don't have the authority to." Angela lifted her phone again, tapping the screen. "Charles Whitaker is still on call." A familiar deep voice boomed again. "Angela, I've been listening. Effective immediately. Consider them terminated. And if any manager resists, they'll join the list." The lobby broke into applause louder than before. Linda gasped, covering her mouth. Rachel burst into tears. Edward Blake muttered, "This is ridiculous," but no one paid him attention anymore. Joshua looked up at his mother, awe dawning across his small face. "You really did it, Mom?" Angela knelt, her forehead touching his again. "No, Joshua, we did it because you stood with me." For a moment, silence returned, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was filled with something different: respect, admiration, the faint sound of hope. And in the corner, Daniel Wu's phone buzzed again. 3 million views, he announced. Hashtags everywhere. This isn't just viral. This is history in the making. Angela straightened, her gaze sweeping the room. "Remember this," she told them. "Change doesn't begin in boardrooms. It begins when someone refuses to be pushed aside in a lobby." Joshua nodded firmly, his chin lifted just a little higher. The twist had landed. What seemed like a cruel mistake was revealed as a systemic design, and Angela, calm and resolute, had turned humiliation into the first blow against a structure built on prejudice. Morning light poured across the glass towers of downtown Chicago. The skyline, glittering against Lake Michigan, carried none of the tension that had settled inside Sterling Hospitality's headquarters. On the 12th floor, in a boardroom lined with mahogany panels and walls of windows, executives filed into leather chairs. Some carried tablets filled with graphs, others shuffled papers, but their nervous eyes betrayed the truth. No chart could soften the blow of what had erupted overnight. Angela Coleman entered quietly, her son Joshua beside her. Though he wore a simple navy sweater, Joshua's presence drew stares. Some directors whispered, others avoided his gaze, as if the sight of a child in this solemn place reminded them of what they were all trying to contain. At the head of the table sat Charles Whitaker, the chairman. His jaw was set, his eyes heavy with fatigue. He had been awake since Angela's call the night before, managing damage control with PR teams, lawyers, and investors. "Let's begin," Whitaker said, his voice gravelly. A massive screen behind him flickered on. Headlines from major outlets filled the room. Black CEO and her son humiliated at Sterling Grand. 9 minutes of racism. How one hotel sparked a corporate firestorm. Angela Coleman stands tall. Viral reckoning for hospitality industry. Beside the headlines scrolled live feed, social media hashtags, millions of comments, calls for boycotts, shares climbing by the second. An executive cleared his throat. The stock fell 7% in pre-market trading. Analysts are predicting steeper losses by closing if we don't act decisively. Another added, "We've received inquiries from the Department of Transportation and the Illinois Human Rights Commission. They want documentation of our training protocols." Angela sat still, hands folded, listening. Joshua clutched her arm but stayed quiet, his eyes wide as if absorbing the gravity of this new world where adults spoke of markets and policies instead of toys and birthdays. Whitaker turned to Angela. "You've seen the coverage. The question now is, how do you want to proceed?" Angela looked around the table. She saw a row of suits, expensive watches, polished shoes, and behind them, fear. But beneath the fear, she also sensed something else, a desperate hope that she might steer them through the storm. "I don't want to proceed with excuses," she said. Her voice was calm, but the words hit like stone. Last night wasn't an accident. It wasn't one employee's poor judgment. It was a culture you've all allowed to fester. Policies written to favor image over dignity, training that rewarded profiling instead of service. And my son paid the price. Joshua looked down at his hands. Angela reached for him, steadying him with a light touch, then continued, "You hired me as a shareholder, not just a face. You knew I would push for change, but last night proved we've delayed too long. The world has caught up, and now we act or we lose everything." Silence gripped the room. A younger board member shifted uncomfortably. "What exactly are you proposing?" "Angela." She rose to her feet, her presence filling the room more than any headline. "First, full termination of every staff member involved, effective immediately. Not review, not probation removal. Second, the dismantling of any policy or guideline that allows employees to judge guests based on appearance. Third, mandatory anti-bias and empathy training for every employee, from concierge to corporate, with certification renewed annually. Fourth, a transparent hotline for guests and staff to report discrimination, managed by a third party. And fifth, she paused, her eyes sweeping the table, an independent diversity officer with real power, one who answers directly to shareholders, not managers, and I volunteered to lead that charge. Gasps fluttered around the room. Some executives scribbled notes, others exchanged glances. One older man cleared his throat. That will be costly. Training across all hotels. Independent audits, we're talking millions. Angela's gaze was steady. What is more costly, reform or irrelevance training or lawsuits? Millions spent now or billions lost in brand collapse? Look at the headlines. Look at the faces on your screens. Do you really think guests will forgive us if we drag our feet? Whitaker leaned back, his eyes on her. And if we move too quickly, investors may panic. They don't like upheaval. Angela's lips curved into the faintest smile. Then we reframe it. We don't call it upheaval. We call it leadership. Joshua shifted, tugging her sleeve. His whisper was small but audible in the quiet room. Tell them about last night. Mom. Angela hesitated, then nodded. She crouched to his level. Do you want to tell them? Joshua's voice shook but carried across the boardroom. They told me we didn't belong. They said we couldn't stay. On my birthday. He blinked quickly, swallowing hard. I don't want any other kid to hear that. Not ever. Executives who had been stone-faced looked down. One woman wiped the corner of her eye discreetly. Angela rose again. That's the cost, his tears, and the tears of every guest who's been pushed aside, dismissed, or erased because they didn't fit an image. That's what happens when policy values brand over people. A long silence followed. Then Whitaker spoke. I support this plan. Entirely ineffective today. We begin implementing every measure you outlined. You'll lead the committee. Full authority. Several directors shifted as if to object, but Whitaker's tone cut off resistance. This company has no future if we don't follow her lead. Angela nodded once, not with triumph, but with quiet resolve. Then let's rebuild, not as Sterling Grand, but as Sterling Human, a place where dignity is the brand. Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then firmer. Executives clapped. A few even stood. For the first time since the previous night, the air carried something lighter than shame. Joshua looked up at his mother, pride shimmering in his eyes. You did it, Mom. Angela smiled, pulling him close. No, Joshua. We're just beginning. By noon the next day, the Sterling Grand Lobby was no longer just a hotel entrance. It was a shrine, a flashpoint, a battlefield. Reporters crowded the sidewalks outside, cameras flashing, vans with satellite dishes lined the curb. Guests stopped at the revolving doors, smartphones raised, live streaming updates like amateur correspondents. Inside, the tension hadn't eased. It had simply transformed. The fired staff were gone, escorted out with as little ceremony as possible. But the echo of their actions remained, replayed in every headline and every video clip bouncing across the internet. Angela Coleman walked through the lobby slowly, her son Joshua clutching her hand. He had barely slept, his young mind restless with images of uniformed guards, raised voices, the word unwelcome cutting deeper than it should have. But today, his mother's calm steadied him. Reporters spotted her. Shouts filled the air. Angela, do you feel vindicated? Do you think Sterling Grand should close entirely? Angela, what do you say to those calling this overblown? She didn't stop. She guided Joshua past the chaos, into a side hall where Charles Whitaker was waiting. His suit was immaculate, but his shoulders sagged under exhaustion. "They want answers," he murmured. "They deserve them," Angela replied. Together they entered the conference room where a press briefing had been hastily arranged. Rows of cameras pointed at the podium. Journalists tapped notes on glowing laptops. The air carried the scent of burnt coffee and the static hum of anticipation. Angela approached the microphone. She did not need notes. "Good afternoon," she began. Her voice was calm, steady, carrying weight without raising volume. "Last night, my son and I were told we did not belong in a hotel I partially own. Our reservation was canceled, our dignity dismissed, because of policies that valued image over people." A murmur swept the room. The cameras blinked in rhythm. Angela continued, "This is not about one hotel, one clerk, or even one night. This is about a system that tells some people they belong and others they don't, a system that dresses bias in polished uniforms and calls it discretion. That system ends now." She paused. The silence was thick, expectant, effective immediately. "Sterling Hospitality will implement sweeping reforms, the end of discriminatory guidelines, mandatory anti-bias training, transparent reporting hotlines, and oversight by an independent diversity officer. These changes are not optional. They are our future, because dignity will be our brand." The room erupted in questions. A reporter from the New York Times raised her hand. "Angela, some critics say you acted out of personal anger, not leadership." What do you say to that? Angela's lips curved faintly. "Leadership without anger at injustice is not leadership. But what I did was not for me. It was for every child who deserves to walk into a building without hearing they don't belong." Joshua tugged at her sleeve. She lowered the mic. He whispered, "Can I say something?" Her eyes softened. She nodded. Joshua stepped onto the small stool placed at the podium. His voice was small but carried. "They ruined my birthday, but my mom said we had to stay, and I think she was right, because now nobody else will have to feel like I did." Cameras clicked in rapid fire. Some reporters lowered their eyes, visibly moved. Angela guided him back down, then faced the crowd once more. "This is not the end of a story. It is the beginning. Hold us accountable. Hold me accountable. We cannot change the past, but we can build a future where respect is not negotiable." Applause rose, unplanned, from the back rows. Not all joined, but enough to shift the energy in the room. Yet, as she left the stage, Charles leaned close. "Brace yourself. They won't all applaud." He was right. By evening, news panels flared with divided opinions. On one network, pundits praised her courage, calling her a voice for dignity in corporate America. On another, critics scoffed. She overreacted. One commentator said, "His tie loosened. Hotels make mistakes every day. To fire an entire staff and call it systemic racism, that's corporate theater." Social media fractured too. Hashtags like "Dignity at Sterling" and "Justice for Angela" trended, but so did "John Boycott Sterling" and "Entitled CEO." Supporters flooded feeds with messages of solidarity, but detractors spread memes mocking her speech, twisting Joshua's tearful words into cruel jokes. Angela scrolled through some of it in her hotel suite that night, the glow of the screen reflected in her tired eyes. Joshua was asleep on the couch, clutching his stuffed bear. Charles knocked softly before entering. "It's rough out there," he said. Angela set the phone aside. It always is when truth is involved. He hesitated. "Some investors are nervous. They want reassurance. They'll get results." Angela replied. Her tone was firm, but her shoulders slumped the moment he left. She sank into the chair, burying her face in her hands. For all her calm in public, the storm gnawed at her in private. The weight of millions of eyes, millions of judgments, pressed against her chest. She whispered to herself, not as a CEO, but as a mother. "Did I do the right thing?" A small voice answered from the couch, groggy but clear. "You did, Mom." Angela looked up. Joshua had stirred, his eyes heavy with sleep. "You did," he repeated softly. "I'm proud of you." Tears pricked her eyes, but she smiled. "Then that's enough." The storm outside raged on headlines, hashtags, critics, and praise. But inside that quiet suite, for one fragile moment, mother and son found peace. The following week, Chicago felt different. The Sterling Grand was no longer just a luxury hotel on Michigan Avenue. It had become a symbol, a headline, a dividing line. Crowds gathered outside every day. Some carried signs of support. "Dignity is the brand. We stand with Angela. Respect every guest." Others shouted angrily, accusing her of overreach, of turning a personal grievance into corporate drama. Police erected barricades to keep protesters and counter-protesters apart. Angela Coleman watched from her suite window. Down below, the voices rose and clashed like storm waves against stone. Joshua pressed his forehead to the glass. "They're here because of us," he asked softly. Angela rested her hand on his shoulder. "They're here because of what it means. Joshua, what happened to us could happen to anyone, and people are choosing sides." Her phone buzzed. Charles Whitaker's name flashed. She answered quickly. "Angela." His voice was taut. "You've been invited to the National Hour tonight, prime time. Millions will be watching." Angela closed her eyes briefly. She had expected this moment. The incident had already spiraled into hearings, investigations, and shareholder debates. The talk show would be the largest stage yet, the place where narratives were cemented. "I'll go," she said simply. That evening, under glaring studio lights, she sat across from host Caroline Foster, a sharp-eyed journalist known for pressing hard questions. Joshua sat backstage with a trusted assistant, clutching his bear, watching through a monitor. Caroline leaned forward, her voice measured. "Angela." Millions saw the viral video. Millions more have debated it since. Some say you stood for justice. Others argue you overreacted, punishing an entire staff for the actions of a few. How do you respond? Angela folded her hands. "I respond with truth. My son and I were denied dignity. We were told we didn't belong, not because of what we paid, but because of who we were. And when a culture allows that, it isn't just a few employees, it's a system. Systems demand systemic change." Caroline pressed. "But critics argue this was a PR stunt designed to raise your profile as a shareholder." Was it? Angela's eyes held steady. "If I wanted fame, I wouldn't have chosen humiliation as the path. This wasn't a stunt. This was a mother refusing to let her child's tears be dismissed as trivial." A still image flashed on the studio screen, Joshua's tear-streaked face from that night in the lobby. The audience gasped softly. Caroline's tone softened. "Your son's words, 'I don't want any other kid to feel like I did,' have been quoted everywhere. Do you think this has moved beyond Sterling hospitality?" "Yes," Angela said. "This isn't just about hotels. It's about every classroom, every office, every store where someone is told quietly or openly that they don't belong. My son's birthday became a mirror. The world didn't like what it saw. Now it has a choice: look away or change." The studio was quiet. Then applause swelled, unprompted. Caroline allowed it, then leaned in. "One last question. Angela, are you prepared for the backlash for lawsuits, boycotts, even threats?" Angela drew a breath. Backlash means the truth hit its mark. If we face anger for demanding dignity, then so be it. I'd rather stand in the storm than hide in comfort while others are erased. The segment ended to thunderous applause. Backstage, Joshua ran into her arms. "You sounded like a superhero," he whispered. She kissed his forehead. "No, baby, I just sounded like your mom." But the storm grew louder. The next morning, newspapers blared, "Angela Coleman electrifies national audience, sterling hospitality. Faces federal scrutiny, boycotts mount. Can the brand survive?" At the same time, critics sharpened their knives. Opinion pieces called her an opportunist, a disruptor, even a danger to free enterprise. Anonymous threats filled her inbox. Some investors pushed to cut her from the board. In Washington, lawmakers debated. One senator called for new oversight of discrimination in hospitality, citing Angela by name. Another accused her of political theater. The divide was clear. Back in Chicago, Angela faced her own doubts. Late at night, while Joshua slept, she sat by the window staring at the city lights. Her thoughts circled. Was she tearing down what she had helped build? Would the backlash hurt the very employees she wanted to protect? Could one viral moment truly reshape an industry? Her phone buzzed again. A message from Sophia Patel, the intern who had revealed the memo. "Ms. Coleman, thank you. Because of you, I don't feel invisible anymore." Angela's chest tightened. She closed her eyes, holding on to the message like a lifeline. The storm outside was real. The critics, the protests, the threats, they were all real. But so was this a young woman who finally felt seen, a child who no longer believed his birthday had been stolen forever, a nation beginning to talk about dignity not as an accessory, but as a necessity. Angela whispered to herself, steady and certain. The storm is proof. We're shifting the ground. Joshua stirred in his sleep, murmuring softly. Angela brushed a curl from his forehead, watching him rest. In his peace, she found her answer. She wasn't just leading a fight for her company. She was leading a fight for him, for Sophia, for anyone who had ever been told to wait outside. And outside her window, the city hummed, restless and alive, waiting for the next move. 3 months had passed since that night in the Sterling Grand Lobby. Chicago's winter had begun to thaw. Lake Michigan shimmered with early spring light, and the city carried the hum of renewal. Inside the Sterling Hospitality headquarters, banners read, "The new standard, dignity first." Employees moved with a different kind of energy, tentative, but hopeful. Training rooms buzzed with sessions on empathy and inclusion. Anonymous hotlines flashed on posters in every hallway. Guest feedback surveys showed signs of change. Words like welcomed, respected, and valued appeared more often than ever before. Angela Coleman walked the corridors quietly. Though she carried the title of Independent Diversity Officer now, her stride was the same calm, deliberate pace that had steadied her in the lobby that night. Joshua skipped beside her, holding a notebook filled with doodles of hotel lobbies redesigned with balloons, open doors, and smiling faces. "Are these for me?" Angela teased, peeking at the sketches. "No." Joshua grinned. "For the future hotels. They need to look like they're happy to see kids." Angela laughed softly. "Then we'll make sure they do." That afternoon, she stood at the podium of the National Hospitality Diversity Summit in Washington, D.C. The hall was filled with executives, lawmakers, activists, and journalists. Her image appeared on massive screens, her words streaming live to millions across the country. She began not with numbers or policies, but with a story. On my son's 10th birthday, we walked into a hotel suite we had reserved and were told we didn't belong. 9 minutes later, I fired the staff responsible. But the truth is, this wasn't about 9 minutes. It was about decades. Decades of people quietly turned away, quietly humiliated, quietly erased. My son's tears forced us to see what we had long ignored. The audience was silent, eyes fixed on her. Since then, Sterling hospitality has transformed. Not perfectly, not fully, but we've begun. And here is what we've learned. Dignity is not an expense. It is an investment. It creates loyalty deeper than discounts. It builds trust stronger than marble lobbies. And it reminds every guest, every employee, that they are human first and customer second. Applause swelled, rolling through the hall. Angela paused, letting it settle before continuing. This movement is not mine alone. It belongs to every child who asked, "Do I belong here?" It belongs to every employee who feared speaking up. It belongs to every guest who carried humiliation in silence. Today, we say silence ends. Change begins. Her voice rose, not in anger, but in conviction. From boardrooms to classrooms, from airports to corner stores, dignity must be the brand, because respect has no price tag and justice has no lobby level. The hall erupted in a standing ovation. Some executives wiped tears. Lawmakers nodded gravely. Activists raised their fists. Back in Chicago, Daniel Wu streamed the speech live to his millions of followers. Margaret Hill watched from her living room, whispering, "She did it." Sophia Patel sat in a training room at Sterling Grand, finally promoted, tears in her eyes. Even Carl Jennings, the former guard now working security at a community center, watched on a small TV in the break room, reflecting on lessons learned the hardest way. And Joshua, seated in the front row, clapped until his small hands stung. His face glowed with pride that no camera could fully capture. After the summit, reporters pressed close. "Angela, what's next?" one asked. Angela smiled gently. "Next, we keep going. This isn't the end of a story. It's the beginning of a legacy my son will inherit, and one I hope your children will too." That evening, she returned to Chicago. The Sterling Grand lobby, once filled with tension, now held a different scene. A jazz trio played softly near the bar. Guests checked in with ease, greeted warmly by staff who had undergone the new training. A little girl skipped across the marble floor, balloons in hand. No one stopped her. Joshua tugged at his mother's sleeve. "It feels different, doesn't it?" Angela nodded. "It does, because it is." They walked together toward the Skyline Suite, the room that had once been stolen from them. This time, the door opened without hesitation. Inside, the suite glowed with soft light, the view of the city stretching wide and welcoming. On the table sat a small cake with candles, courtesy of the new staff. Joshua's eyes widened. "But my birthday was months ago." Angela smiled. Some celebrations never expire. They lit the candles together. Joshua closed his eyes, whispered a wish, and blew them out. Angela asked softly, "What did you wish for?" He grinned. "That no kid ever hears they don't belong again." Angela pulled him close, her eyes shining. "That's not just a wish, Joshua. That's our mission." Outside the window, Chicago's lights sparkled against the night sky. The storm that once raged had passed, but its echoes had reshaped an industry, a city, perhaps even a nation. Angela Coleman stood not as a victim of humiliation, but as a builder of hope. Her story had begun with exclusion. It ended with a door opened wide. Life has a way of placing us in moments where dignity is tested. For Angela Coleman, being told she didn't belong in a place she partly owned was more than an insult. It was a reminder of how easily respect can be denied. Yet she chose not to walk away. She chose to stand, not just for herself, but for her son, and for countless others who have carried quiet humiliations in silence. The lesson is clear. Respect is not optional, whether in a hotel lobby, a workplace, or even our own homes. The way we treat others leaves lasting imprints. For older generations who have seen cycles of progress and prejudice, this story is a reminder that dignity must be defended at every stage of life. It also teaches us about the power of choice. We can ignore injustice, or we can confront it calmly, firmly, with the intent to build something better. Angela turned pain into a platform for change, and we, too, can leave behind a legacy that tells the next generation you belong. Your dignity matters, and your voice can transform the world. Thank you so much for watching and sharing this journey with us. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like the video, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to our channel. Together, we can keep telling stories that remind us of the power of dignity, respect, and hope.